Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle journey into medieval England of the 1340s. Tonight, we'll discover the quiet world of bread making, alongside people who lived by the rhythm of rising dough and wood-fired ovens. Whether you're settling into bed or already drifting toward deep sleep, I'm grateful you're here to explore these quiet corners of history with me. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Perhaps you're in a cosy bedroom, or maybe listening from a comfortable chair by a window. It's a lovely thought, all of us finding our way to deep sleep through these gentle stories from long ago. The first stirring of dawn finds you, Thomas, awakening not to cockerel calls, but to the soft whisper of your master's leather shoes against the wooden floor of the bakehouse. The darkness still holds the village of Ashwell in its gentle embrace as you slowly emerge from sleep on your straw pallet in the corner of the bakehouse. The air carries the lingering sweetness of yesterday's baking, a comforting mixture of wheat flour, yeast, and the smoky residue from the great stone oven that dominates the room. Your master, Edmund the baker, moves with practiced quiet through the pre-dawn ritual, his weathered hands already reaching for the wooden paddle to check the coals that have been sleeping through the night. You stretch slowly, feeling the familiar ache in your shoulders from yesterday's kneading, a pleasant soreness that speaks of honest work. The rough wool of your tunic, dampened slightly by the bakehouse's perpetual humidity, clings to your skin as you sit up. Through the single window, barely larger than your head, you can see the faintest suggestion of grey touching the eastern horizon. Soon the bells of St. Mary's will ring for prime, but for now, the world belongs to bakers and their ancient craft. Edmund's movements create a soft symphony of morning sounds, the gentle scrape of ash being cleared from the oven's mouth, the quiet thud of logs being positioned, the whispered rush of bellows coaxing reluctant flames to life. You've been his apprentice for 3 months now, long enough to know that these first moments set the rhythm for everything that follows. The bread waits for no one, and neither does the village that depends upon it. Rising from your pallet, you feel the cool stones beneath your bare feet, each one worn smooth by generations of bakers who began their days in this same manner. The bakehouse, built of thick limestone walls and heavy oak beams, holds the warmth of countless loaves within its bones. Even now, in the deep of night, the air carries a gentle heat that speaks of fires that have burned here for over a century. Your first task, learned through repetition rather than instruction, is to tend to the water. The large earthenware vessels that hold tomorrow's bread stand in neat rows along the wooden bench, each one containing the mysterious alchemy of flour, water, and wild yeast that will transform into sustenance for 30 families. You approach them with the reverence Edmund has taught you, not through words, but through the careful way his hands always move around the dough, as if greeting old friends. The water for today's mixing sits in wooden buckets, drawn yesterday evening from the village well. It has had time to settle, to reach the temperature of the room, to become one with the bakehouse's atmosphere. You dip your finger into the first bucket, testing not just temperature, but somehow the water's readiness, the way it feels against your skin. Edmund taught you this, though neither of you could explain exactly what you're testing for. It's simply something bakers know. The grinding wheel stands silent in the corner, its millstone surface still dusted with yesterday's grain. Soon, when the sun climbs higher, you'll work the handle in steady circles, crushing the wheat berries that arrived 3 days ago from the manor's granary. But for now, the wheel rests, and you move instead to the bins where flour waits like fine snow, sifted and ready for the day's first mixing. Edmund approaches the largest mixing bowl, a vessel carved from a single piece of oak and polished smooth by countless hands and batches of dough. His movements flow with the unconscious grace of someone who has performed these actions for 30 years. You watch as he begins to measure flour, not with scales or precise implements, but with his cupped hands, each handful representing knowledge passed down through generations of guild bakers. The flour falls into the bowl like a gentle snowfall, each addition considered and deliberate. Edmund's hands move in a pattern you're beginning to recognise. 2 handfuls for the base, then smaller additions, adjustments made by touch and instinct rather than measurement. He pauses between additions, letting the flour settle, watching how it behaves in the bowl, reading signs that remain mysterious to your apprentice eyes. You step closer, breathing in the clean, earthy scent of the flour. This wheat was grown in fields you can see from the bakehouse door, harvested by hands, ground in the mill where your cousin works the great wheel. There's comfort in this connection, in knowing that the bread you'll make today carries within it the sunshine and rain of familiar lands, the labour of familiar faces. The yeast culture, what Edmund calls simply the mother, sits in its special crock near the warm stones of the oven's base. This living mixture of flour and water has been fed and tended for years, possibly decades. It bubbles softly with quiet life, a sound so gentle it might be mistaken for distant conversation. Edmund has told you that some bakers' mothers are older than the bakers themselves, passed down like family treasures from master to apprentice. As Edmund begins to work a portion of the mother into today's flour, you prepare the wooden paddles and scrapers that will guide the dough through its transformations. These tools, worn smooth by use and dark with age, feel familiar in your hands now. The weight of the large paddle, the way the scraper's edge catches against your palm, the grain of the wood against your fingers, these sensations have become part of your daily awakening. The mixing begins with gentle stirring, Edmund's strong arms moving the paddle in slow, hypnotic circles. The flour and water begin their ancient dance, transforming from separate elements into something new. You watch the texture change, from dry powder to shaggy mixture to the beginnings of true dough. Each stage has its own character, its own requirements for speed and pressure and attention. The sound of mixing fills the bakehouse, a soft rhythmic scraping punctuated by the gentle slap of dough against bowl. This is the heartbeat of the morning, the sound that tells the village, though still sleeping, that all is well, that bread will grace their tables once again. Edmund's breathing falls into rhythm with his stirring, and you find your own breath matching theirs, creating a quiet harmony of human and craft. Steam begins to rise from the bowl as the ingredients warm slightly from the friction of mixing. The air grows thick with the scent of awakening dough, a smell that speaks of nourishment and home and the continuation of traditions stretching back beyond memory. You breathe it in deeply, letting it fill your lungs and settle into your bones, becoming part of you just as you're becoming part of this ancient practice. Edmund steps back from the bowl, his movements indicating that this first mixing is complete. The dough sits in rough, shaggy formation, not yet the smooth, elastic mass it will become, but no longer simply flour and water. It has crossed the threshold into something alive, something that will grow and change and eventually feed the village. You approach to take your turn, your hands already knowing the weight and resistance they'll encounter. The dough feels cool and slightly sticky against your palms as you begin the kneading. Your movements, still clumsy compared to Edmund's fluid grace, nevertheless carry the beginnings of skill. Push with the heel of your hand, fold the dough over itself, turn a quarter circle, push again. The rhythm is meditative, almost like prayer, each repetition bringing the dough closer to its proper texture. As you work, you feel the dough changing beneath your hands. What began as a rough mixture gradually smooths and becomes elastic. The individual grains of flour disappear into a unified whole, and the stickiness gives way to a surface that releases cleanly from your palms. This transformation never fails to seem magical, this moment when separate ingredients become bread in waiting. Edmund moves around the bakehouse, preparing other elements of the day's work. You hear him checking the temperature of the oven by holding his hand near the opening, counting quietly under his breath. The coals glow with steady heat now, and soon it will be time to sweep the oven clean and load the first loaves. But that moment still lies ahead, separated from now by hours of rising and shaping and patient waiting. The bells of St. Mary's begin their call to prime, their bronze voices carrying across the sleeping village. Soon the first customers will appear at the bakehouse door, servants from the manor house, early rising merchants, mothers with hungry children. They'll come seeking yesterday's bread, still available in dwindling quantities, but mainly they'll come to place orders for today's fresh loaves, to ensure their place in the day's production. You continue kneading, feeling your shoulders warm from the work, your forearms beginning to ache in the familiar way that speaks of honest labour. The dough grows smoother with each fold and turn, developing the strength it will need to hold the gases that will make it rise. Edmund has taught you to listen to the dough, to feel when it has been worked enough, when further kneading would harm rather than help its development. The first birds begin their morning songs outside, their calls mixing with the continuing sounds of bread making to create the symphony of dawn. The darkness at the window gradually softens to grey, then to the palest suggestion of rose as the sun prepares to show itself above the eastern hills. The bakehouse remains lit by firelight and the gentle glow of oil lamps, creating a warm island of activity in the quiet village. Edmund approaches with salt, precious and carefully measured, dissolved in a small amount of warm water. The addition of salt will strengthen the dough and enhance its flavour, but it must be incorporated gradually, worked in with the same patience that guides every aspect of the baker's craft. You make a well in the centre of the dough and pour in the salt water, then begin the process of working it through the mass. The transformation continues, the dough becoming more cohesive and responsive with each addition and each minute of work. Your hands, initially awkward with this morning's first dough, begin to remember their training, to move with increasing confidence and skill. The calluses that have formed on your palms over these months of apprenticeship protect you from the friction, allowing you to work longer and with greater strength. As the kneading nears completion, you become aware of the subtle signs Edmund has taught you to recognise. The dough springs back when poked gently. Its surface takes on a smooth, almost silky appearance. When stretched thin between your fingers, it becomes translucent without breaking, what Edmund calls the window, the sign that the gluten has developed properly and the dough is ready for its first rise. You shape the finished dough into a smooth ball and place it in the large rising bowl, covering it with a clean linen cloth that has been warmed near the fire. The cloth settles over the dough like a blanket, creating the warm, moist environment the yeast needs to do its work. Now begins the patient waiting that is as much a part of baking as the active work of mixing and kneading. The fire in the oven burns steadily, consuming the carefully selected logs that will provide the heat for today's baking. Edmund checks the flames regularly, adjusting the airflow with practiced movements that control the fire's intensity. The oven must reach exactly the right temperature, hot enough to create the fierce initial heat that forms the crust, but not so hot that it burns the bread before the interior can cook through. You help Edmund prepare the other elements of the morning's work, checking the supply of flour, arranging the wooden peels that will slide loaves into and out of the oven, setting out the baskets that will hold the shaped loaves during their final rise. Each tool has its place, each step its proper sequence, and the morning unfolds according to rhythms established by generations of bakers before you. The village slowly awakens around the bakehouse. You hear the first footsteps on the cobbled street, the creaking of shutters being opened, the distant lowing of cattle being led to pasture. The baker's day begins before all others, but soon the world will catch up, and the bakehouse will become a centre of activity and community life. As you move through these familiar tasks, you feel the deep satisfaction that comes from work that feeds others, from participation in the daily miracle of transforming simple ingredients into sustenance. Your hands, stained now with flour and slightly sticky from the dough, carry the scent of bread making that will linger throughout the day, marking you as one who serves the village's most basic need. The first dough rests quietly under its linen cover, beginning the slow process of fermentation that will develop its flavour and texture. Soon, you'll need to check its progress, to judge when it has risen sufficiently for the next stage of its journey toward becoming bread. But for now, there's time to begin the second batch, to repeat the ancient alchemy of flour and water and yeast that has sustained human communities for thousands of years. Edmund moves with unhurried efficiency around the bakehouse, his every action purposeful and considered. You watch him work, trying to absorb not just the techniques but the deeper understanding that guides his decisions. When to add more flour, how to judge the fire's readiness, which loaves should be positioned where in the oven for optimal baking. This knowledge comes slowly, through observation and practice, and the gradual development of senses that can read the subtle signs of fermentation and heat and dough readiness. The morning light grows stronger at the window, painting the flour-dusted surfaces of the bakehouse with golden warmth. Soon, the oven will be ready, and the first loaves will begin their transformation in the fierce heat. But what will happen when you slide those loaves into the blazing oven, and how will you know they're ready to emerge as perfect bread? The answer comes gradually, as all knowledge does in the bakehouse, through the patient accumulation of small observations and the wisdom Edmund shares in quiet moments between tasks. The oven's readiness reveals itself not through dramatic signs, but through subtle changes that only experienced eyes can read. The way the flames dance differently when the stones have absorbed enough heat, the particular colour the oven walls take on when the temperature reaches perfection. You learn to test the oven's heat by watching Edmund hold his hand near the opening, counting steadily under his breath. 1, 2, 3. When he can hold his hand there for exactly 5 counts before the heat becomes unbearable, the oven is ready for bread. Too hot, and his hand retreats after 2 counts. Time then to let the fire burn down slightly. Too cool, and he can hold his position for 7 or 8 counts, requiring more fuel and more waiting. The first dough continues its quiet transformation under the warming linen, the yeast working its ancient magic within the mass of flour and water. You lift the cloth periodically to check its progress, learning to recognise the subtle signs of proper fermentation. The surface should be slightly domed, smooth, but showing the first tiny bubbles that indicate active yeast. When you press gently with one finger, the depression should fill back slowly, showing that the dough has developed strength but remains pliable. Edmund begins preparing the day's second batch, and this time you work alongside him from the beginning, your hands moving in echo of his experienced motions. The flour for this batch comes from a different sack, one that arrived just yesterday from the mill. Each batch of grain carries its own character. Some wheat produces flour that absorbs more water, some creates dough that rises more quickly, some yields bread with a different texture or flavour. You dip your hands into the new flour, feeling its fineness between your fingers. This batch feels slightly coarser than yesterday's, with tiny specks of bran that escape the sifting process. Edmund nods approvingly when you mention this observation. "Good eye, Thomas," he says quietly. "This wheat came from the fields near the river. The soil there makes grain with more character, more flavour in the finished bread. The measuring of flour becomes a meditation of its own. Edmund shows you how to cup your hands consistently, how to let the flour fall in even streams, how to judge by sight and feel when enough has been added. There are no scales in this bakehouse, no precise measurements written on parchment. The knowledge lives in the hands and eyes and nose, passed down through generations of bakers who learned by touch and taste and intuition. Water comes next, drawn from the same buckets you prepared earlier but now somehow different, as if it too has been affected by the bakehouse's atmosphere. Edmund tests its temperature with his elbow, a gesture that seemed strange to you when you first arrived but now appears completely natural. Water too warm will kill the yeast. Too cool will slow its work beyond usefulness. The temperature must be just right, warm as fresh milk, comfortable against the skin. The mixing begins again, but this time you take the lead while Edmund guides with gentle corrections. Your movements are becoming more fluid, more confident. The paddle feels lighter in your hands, and the resistance of the dough speaks to you in ways you're beginning to understand. When the mixture becomes too stiff, you add water drop by drop. When it seems too loose, a careful sprinkle of flour restores the proper consistency. As you work, Edmund shares stories of other apprentices he has trained, of seasonal variations in bread making, of the particular challenges that different weather brings to the craft. In summer, dough rises too quickly and must be watched constantly to prevent overproofing. In winter, the bakehouse stays warmer than the rest of the village, but the dough moves more slowly, requiring patience and sometimes additional warmth from proximity to the fire. The rhythm of kneading becomes automatic, freeing your mind to absorb Edmund's teachings about the deeper mysteries of bread making. The grain itself varies with the seasons. Spring wheat different from winter wheat, each requiring slight adjustments in technique. Wet years produce grain that makes dough differently than dry years. Even the position of fields affects the final bread. Grain from south-facing slopes behaves differently than grain from northern exposures. You learn about the guild regulations that govern every aspect of bread making in the village. The weight of loaves must be exact, checked regularly by the guild's appointed bread weigher. The quality must be consistent, no sawdust or inferior grain mixed in to increase profits. The prices are set according to ancient formulas that account for the cost of grain, the baker's labour, and a fair profit that allows families like Edmund's to survive and prosper. The first dough has risen properly now, nearly doubling in size under its linen cover. Edmund shows you how to test its readiness by pressing 2 fingers gently into the surface. If the dough springs back immediately, it needs more time. If it doesn't spring back at all, it has risen too long and will produce heavy bread with poor texture. But when the depression fills back slowly and partially, leaving a slight indentation, the timing is perfect. Now comes the delicate process of dividing and shaping the dough into individual loaves. Edmund's knife moves through the mass with practiced precision, creating portions of exactly equal weight. Each piece is shaped quickly but carefully, formed into tight rounds that will hold their shape during the final rise. The surface of each loaf must be smooth and unbroken, the tension just right to create the proper texture when baked. You watch Edmund's hands as he shapes loaf after loaf, each one identical to the last. His palms cup the dough, rolling it against the wooden surface while his fingers guide and adjust. The motion looks simple, but proves deceptively difficult when you attempt it yourself. Your first efforts produce lopsided loaves, some too loose, others so tight they'll tear when they rise. Gentle but firm, Edmund advises, guiding your hands through the proper motion. Think of it as greeting each loaf, welcoming it into its final form. The dough will tell you what it needs if you listen with your hands. Gradually your shaped loaves begin to resemble Edmund's, though they lack his perfect uniformity. Each one is placed carefully in a wooden basket lined with linen and dusted with flour to prevent sticking. These baskets, called bannetons by Edmund, have been shaped by years of use, their surfaces worn smooth and seasoned with the accumulated residue of countless loaves. The shaped loaves begin their final rise in the warm environment near the fire. This stage requires different timing than the first rise. Too short and the bread will be dense, too long and it will collapse when moved. Edmund teaches you to judge readiness by gently touching the surface of a loaf. When properly risen, the dough should feel soft and pillowy, springing back slowly when pressed. While the loaves rise, you and Edmund turn attention to other tasks. The oven must be prepared by removing all ash and coals, then cleaning the stone floor with long-handled brushes until no trace of fuel remains. Any leftover ash will burn onto the bottom of the loaves, creating bitter flavours and unsightly marks. The cleaning must be thorough but quick, as every minute the oven door remains open, precious heat escapes. The long wooden peels, like giant spatulas, are prepared by dusting them lightly with flour. These tools will carry the loaves into the oven's blazing interior, sliding them onto the stone floor with practiced movements that ensure even spacing and proper placement. The arrangement of loaves in the oven follows patterns Edmund learned as an apprentice, maximising the use of space while ensuring each loaf receives optimal heat. You practice the peel technique with empty baskets, learning to slide the wooden blade underneath and lift smoothly, then deposit the imaginary loaf exactly where intended. The motion requires coordination between hands and arms and entire body, a dancing movement that looks effortless when Edmund performs it, but proves challenging for your less experienced muscles. The village comes more fully to life around you. Through the small window, you see people beginning their daily routines. Women carrying water jugs, children driving geese toward the common, merchants preparing their stalls for market day. The bakehouse remains a constant in this changing scene, the steady source of daily bread that allows all other activities to flourish. Edmund explains how the guild system protects both bakers and customers, ensuring fair prices and consistent quality throughout the region. No baker may work without proper training and guild approval. No one may set up a competing bakehouse without permission from both guild and local lord. In return, established bakers like Edmund enjoy protection from unfair competition and assistance during times of hardship. The second batch of dough nears completion of its first rise, the mass swelling under its cloth covering as the yeast continues its work. You check its progress regularly now, your finger testing becoming more confident and accurate. The dough feels alive under your touch, warm and resilient, full of potential energy waiting to be released by the oven's heat. Edmund begins preparing specialty items. Small rolls enriched with eggs and butter for the manor house, sweet pastries flavoured with imported spices for wealthy merchants, dense dark loaves made with rye flour for the poorest families who cannot afford pure wheat bread. Each type of baking requires different techniques, different timing, different judgment about doneness and quality. You help shape the small rolls, your hands growing more skilled with each attempt. The enriched dough feels different from plain bread dough, silkier, more elastic, requiring a lighter touch to avoid overworking. Edmund shows you how to form perfect rounds, how to space them properly on wooden boards for their final rise, how to brush their surfaces with beaten egg to create the glossy brown finish customers expect. The sweet pastries present their own challenges. The dough contains enough sugar and fat to brown quickly in the oven, requiring careful placement away from the hottest areas. Some pieces are shaped into braids, others formed into filled crescents, each one a small artwork that will grace a wealthy family's table. Edmund's hands work with unconscious artistry, creating shapes that are both beautiful and practical. As morning advances toward midday, the rhythm of work intensifies. The first loaves are nearly ready for the oven, their final rise almost complete. Soon will come the critical moment when dough transforms into bread, when months of learning will be tested against the unforgiving heat of the stone oven. You feel anticipation building in your chest, mixed with nervousness about the responsibilities that await. Edmund senses your tension and offers reassurance through his calm presence and steady guidance. Every baker feels this way before the first baking, he tells you quietly. The oven teaches us humility every day, no matter how long we've been working. But trust your training, trust your hands, and trust the dough itself. Bread wants to be perfect. Our job is simply not to interfere with that desire. The final preparations begin as the first loaves reach their optimal rise. Edmund tests each one carefully, making decisions about which will go into the oven first, which should wait a few more minutes, which require repositioning for more even rising. This timing requires experience and intuition that can't be taught from books, only learned through years of daily practice. You help arrange the peels in order, each one loaded with loaves ready for their transformation. The oven waits, its stones radiating stored heat, its interior glowing with the accumulated warmth of carefully burned wood. Soon, the first peel will slide into that blazing chamber, and the true test of the morning's work will begin. But as Edmund reaches for the first loaded peel, preparing to approach the oven's mouth, you notice something troubling about the way one of the loaves has risen, a subtle difference in its surface that might indicate a problem with the dough beneath. Should you speak up and risk disrupting Edmund's careful timing, or trust that his experienced eye has already noticed what concerns you? You clear your throat softly, the sound barely audible above the gentle crackling of the oven fire. "Master Edmund," you say, your voice carefully respectful. "The third loaf from the left. Something seems different about its surface." Edmund pauses, the loaded peel steady in his experienced hands, and follows your gaze to the loaf in question. His eyes, trained by decades of daily observation, examine the subtle variation you've noticed. A slight flatness to the curve, a barely perceptible difference in the way the morning light falls across its surface. He nods slowly, appreciation flickering across his weathered features. "Well spotted, Thomas," he murmurs, setting down the peel with careful deliberation. The dough beneath has likely broken, too much tension when shaping perhaps, or a weak spot in the gluten structure. It would have collapsed in the oven, wasting good flour and disappointing a customer. Together, you gently remove the problematic loaf from its basket, Edmund's fingers probing the dough with the delicate touch of a physician, examining a patient. Indeed, there's a weakness in the structure, a place where the surface has begun to separate from the mass beneath. With practiced movements, he reshapes the dough, working quickly but gently to restore its integrity, before returning it to its basket for additional rising time. This small crisis resolved, Edmund returns to the first peel, but now his movements carry an added layer of attention, checking each loaf one final time before committing it to the oven's transformative heat. You watch as he slides the long wooden blade beneath the first risen loaf, the motion smooth and confident despite the weight of hot, eager dough. The loaf settles onto the peel without losing its shape, ready for its journey into the blazing chamber. The oven's mouth glows like a gateway to another world, the air above it shimmering with heat that you can feel from several feet away. Edmund approaches with the loaded peel, his body moving in a practiced dance. Step forward, slide the blade toward the back of the oven, then withdraw it with a quick, smooth motion that leaves the loaf perfectly positioned on the stone floor. The first bread of the day begins its final transformation. One by one, the remaining loaves follow their companion into the oven's embrace. Edmund's movements become rhythmic, almost meditative. Load the peel, approach the oven, slide forward, withdraw, step back for the next. You watch each loaf disappear into the golden interior, noting how they're spaced for optimal heat circulation, how the largest ones go toward the back where the temperature runs highest, how the smaller rolls find places near the front where they'll bake more gently. With the first batch safely in the oven, Edmund closes the heavy wooden door, sealing the loaves in their chamber of transformation. Now begins the waiting, the time when baker's intuition matters most. Too long in the oven and the bread will burn, too short and it will emerge pale and underdone, the interior still gummy and raw. The timing depends on factors both measurable and mysterious. The exact heat of the stones, the humidity in the air, the particular character of today's dough. You help Edmund prepare the next batch while the first loaves work toward completion. The reshaped loaf has responded well to its additional rising time, regaining the proper dome and tension. Its surface now matches its companions, showing no trace of the weakness you detected earlier. Edmund's quick repair has saved both the loaf and the lesson it represents, that even experienced bakers must remain vigilant, that bread making allows no moment of inattention. The second batch of dough has completed its first rise and awaits division and shaping. This dough feels different under your hands as you help Edmund portion it, slightly stickier, requiring a touch more flour during the shaping process. Each batch carries its own personality, influenced by subtle variations in ingredients, temperature, humidity, even the phase of the moon according to some baker's law. As you work through the familiar motions of shaping loaves, the scent of baking bread begins to emanate from the sealed oven. At first, it's barely detectable, a hint of warmth and grain mixed with the smoky residue of burned wood. Gradually the aroma strengthens, developing the complex notes that speak of crust forming and interior cooking, of starches converting to sugars and proteins setting into structure. Edmund teaches you to read these aromatic signals, explaining how the smell changes as baking progresses. First comes the yeast scent, he says, inhaling deeply, sharp and slightly sour as the heat kills the living organisms and drives off their waste. Then the grain smell strengthens as moisture escapes and concentrates the wheat flavours. Finally, if we've timed it right, comes the rich, toasted aroma of properly browned crust. The shaped loaves from the second batch find their places in clean bannetons, ready to begin their own final rise. These will follow the first batch into the oven, taking advantage of the heat that still radiates from the stones. Edmund explains how a master baker plans the day's baking to use the oven's heat most efficiently. First the bread that requires highest temperatures, then items that bake at moderate heat, finally pastries and delicate items that need the gentler warmth of a cooling oven. While the second batch rises, you help Edmund prepare the specialty items for wealthy customers. The enriched rolls for the manor house receive careful attention, each one shaped to identical size, brushed with beaten egg for glossy crusts, marked with small cuts that will open attractively during baking. These rolls will grace the Lord's table at midday dinner, served alongside meat and wine to important guests. The sweet pastries require even more delicate handling. Edmund shows you how to roll the enriched dough thin enough to wrap around dollops of preserved fruit, how to seal the edges so filling won't leak during baking, how to shape each piece so it will brown evenly and present beautifully on the serving plate. These pastries represent the highest level of the baker's art, commanding prices that help offset the thin margins on ordinary bread. You practice the techniques repeatedly, your hands growing more confident with each attempt. The filled crescents gradually assume more uniform shapes. The braided loaves develop more regular patterns. The small decorated pieces begin to resemble Edmund's examples. This work requires patience and precision, qualities that months of bread making have begun to develop in your character. The first batch continues its transformation behind the oven's wooden door. Edmund judges their progress partly by time, counting carefully from the moment of loading, but mostly by signs that require experienced interpretation. The intensity of the baking aroma, the colour of steam escaping from small gaps around the door, even subtle changes in the sound the fire makes as it interacts with the moisture-laden air inside the chamber. Listen, Edmund instructs, holding up one finger for silence. From within the oven comes a sound like gentle rain, barely audible above the fire's crackling. That's moisture escaping from the bread as the crusts form and harden. When it stops, the loaves are nearly done. When the last wisps of steam fade, they're ready to emerge. You strain your ears to catch these subtle audio cues, adding them to the growing catalogue of sensory knowledge that will eventually make you a competent baker. Every sense participates in the craft. Sight reading the colour of dough and fire, touch feeling the texture of properly risen bread, smell detecting the stages of baking, taste evaluating the finished product, and now hearing the quiet sounds that indicate progress invisible behind closed doors. The village life continues its daily rhythm outside the bakehouse walls. Through the small window you observe the regular parade of people going about their morning tasks. Children carry messages between households, women tend kitchen gardens, men prepare tools for fieldwork. The bakehouse serves as an anchor point in this community life, its steady production of bread providing the foundation upon which all other activities rest. Edmund shares stories of lean times when grain shortages forced bakers to stretch their supplies with whatever substitutes they could find. Ground peas, acorn flour, even sawdust in the most desperate circumstances. These tales remind you of bread's central importance in medieval life, how the availability and quality of daily bread often determined whether families thrived or merely survived. The guild regulations exist partly to prevent such adulteration, ensuring that bread labelled as wheat bread contains only wheat flour, water, salt, and yeast. Bakers who violate these standards face severe penalties, fines, loss of guild membership, even public humiliation in the stocks for serious offences. The trust between baker and community must remain absolute, as families depend on honest bread for their very lives. You help Edmund check the rising progress of the second batch, learning to recognise the subtle signs of proper fermentation. These loaves rise more slowly than the first batch, affected by the declining temperature as morning advances toward midday. Each must be evaluated individually, as slight variations in shaping or positioning can affect rising time significantly. The sweet pastries complete their brief rising period and await their turn in the oven's diminishing heat. These delicate items will bake quickly, their high fat and sugar content promoting rapid browning. Edmund explains how the sequence of baking must be planned carefully. Bread first while heat is most intense, then rolls and pastries, Finally, items like fruit tarts that require gentle, prolonged cooking. Steam begins to lessen around the oven door, indicating that the first batch approaches completion. Edmund opens a small observation port, peering into the blazing interior to check the colour of the developing crusts. The loaves have transformed from pale dough to golden brown bread, their surfaces marked with the attractive pattern of flour dusting and natural cracks that form as crusts set and expand. "Almost ready," Edmund murmurs, closing the port to preserve the remaining heat. Perhaps 2 more minutes, then out they come. He prepares the long-handled wooden peel that will retrieve the finished loaves, checking its surface for any debris that might stick to the hot bread crusts. The anticipation builds as completion approaches. Soon you'll see whether the morning's careful work has produced bread worthy of Edmund's reputation, whether your growing skills have contributed to success or somehow compromised the results. The oven holds its secrets for a few moments longer, the loaves undergoing their final transformation in the blazing heat. But as Edmund reaches for the door handle, preparing to reveal the morning's first triumph or failure, a commotion erupts in the street outside. Voices raised in argument, the sound of heavy footsteps, a dog barking in alarm. Through the small window you catch glimpses of figures moving with urgent purpose, not the leisurely pace of normal morning activity, but something that suggests trouble brewing in the peaceful village of Ashwell. Edmund pauses with his hand on the oven door, listening to the voices outside with the careful attention of someone who has lived in this village for 40 years. The sounds grow clearer as the speakers approach, not the heated anger you first feared, but the animated discussion of merchants arriving early for market day, their voices raised in friendly competition and negotiation. "Ah," Edmund says with visible relief, "just the wool merchants from Hertford, arguing over stall positions again." He chuckles softly, opening the oven door to reveal the morning's first triumph. The loaves have transformed beautifully. Their crusts are perfect golden brown, marked with the attractive patterns that indicate proper fermentation and careful handling. Steam rises from their surfaces as the hot bread meets the cooler air of the bakehouse. You watch in fascination as Edmund slides the long peel beneath each loaf, lifting them from the stone floor with practiced precision. The bread sounds hollow when he taps their bottoms, the traditional test for doneness that generations of bakers have relied upon. One by one, the finished loaves find places on wooden cooling racks, their surfaces crackling gently as they adjust to their new environment. The transformation seems miraculous, though you've witnessed it dozens of times now. This morning's mixture of flour and water and yeast has become something entirely new. Bread with golden crust and tender interior, capable of nourishing families and sustaining life throughout the community. Each loaf represents not just your morning's work, but the accumulated knowledge of countless bakers stretching back through centuries of human civilization. As the first batch cools, Edmund loads the second batch into the oven, taking advantage of the heat that still radiates from the stones. These loaves, shaped from the stickier dough you helped to prepare, require slightly different timing and positioning. Edmund places them with the same careful attention to spacing and heat distribution, ensuring each will receive optimal conditions for proper baking. The commotion outside continues as more merchants arrive for the weekly market. Through the window you observe the familiar ritual of stall preparation, wooden frames being assembled, canvas stretched for protection from sun or rain, goods arranged in attractive displays designed to catch customers' eyes. Market day brings the village fully to life, transforming the quiet street into a bustling centre of commerce and social interaction. Edmund explains how market day affects the bakehouse routine, requiring careful planning to have fresh bread available throughout the day as crowds gather and disperse. Some customers prefer bread still warm from the oven, while others seek loaves that have had time to cool and develop their full flavour. The day's production must be timed to satisfy both preferences, while ensuring nothing goes to waste. You help prepare the specialty items that will command premium prices from market day visitors. The enriched rolls for the manor house receive final touches, a light brushing of egg wash that will create glossy, attractive crusts, small decorative cuts that will open beautifully during baking. These rolls represent the bakehouse at its finest, demonstrating skills that justify Edmund's reputation throughout the region. The sweet pastries require even more careful attention. Each filled crescent must be sealed perfectly to prevent leaking, each braided loaf shaped with mathematical precision to ensure even baking. Edmund's hands move with the unconscious artistry of someone who has performed these motions thousands of times, creating uniform products that will grace the tables of wealthy merchants and minor nobility. You practice these advanced techniques under Edmund's patient guidance, your skills gradually approaching the level required for independent work. The filled pastries still challenge your coordination, keeping the dough thin enough for proper texture while strong enough to contain the sweet filling, sealing edges securely without creating thick, doughy seams that will remain raw after baking. Think of each pastry as a small gift, Edmund advises, watching you struggle with a particularly stubborn seal. The person who buys this will break it open at their table, perhaps sharing it with family or guests. They'll judge not just the taste, but the care visible in its construction. Every fold, every twist of dough reflects on the baker's skill and the bakehouse's reputation. This perspective transforms the work from mere technique to artistry. Each pastry becomes an opportunity to demonstrate mastery, to show the community that Edmund's apprentice is developing skills worthy of eventual guild membership. The responsibility feels both daunting and inspiring, driving you to greater precision and attention to detail. The second batch of bread fills the bakehouse with its developing aroma as the loaves undergo their own transformation. This scent differs slightly from the first batch. The stickier dough produces bread with a more complex flavour profile, slightly denser texture and darker crust colour. Edmund explains how these variations, invisible to casual customers, represent the baker's constant adaptation to changing conditions and ingredients. Market day brings special challenges beyond the increased volume of production. Customers arrive with specific requests. Some want bread baked darker, others prefer lighter crusts. Some request loaves shaped differently for special occasions or family traditions. A skilled baker must be able to accommodate these preferences while maintaining the consistent quality that builds long-term reputation. Edmund shares stories of memorable market days, times when unexpected crowds depleted the day's bread before noon, forcing rapid preparation of additional batches. Other days brought slow sales that left the bakehouse with surplus bread, requiring creative solutions to avoid waste. These experiences taught him to read the rhythms of community life, anticipating demand based on weather, seasonal celebrations and local events. The guild system provides some protection against these uncertainties through regulations that control competition and ensure fair pricing. No baker may undercut established prices to steal customers, nor may anyone set up unauthorised competition without proper training and guild approval. In return, established bakers like Edmund enjoy guaranteed markets and protection against unfair business practices. You help Edmund calculate the day's production needs based on regular customers plus anticipated market day visitors. The manor house requires its usual dozen enriched rolls, plus additional pastries for guests expected at the midday meal. Several wealthy merchant families have placed advance orders for specialty breads made with imported spices and dried fruits. The village priest needs communion wafers prepared with special care and blessed flour. The mathematics of bread making prove more complex than you initially understood. Each batch of dough yields a specific number of loaves depending on the desired size and weight. The oven can accommodate only so many items at once, requiring careful scheduling to complete everything by the required times. Raw materials must be calculated precisely to avoid shortages while minimizing expensive waste. Edmund demonstrates the accounting methods all guild bakers must master: tracking flour usage, calculating costs, determining fair prices that cover expenses while providing reasonable profit. These records face regular inspection by guild officials who ensure compliance with established standards. Accurate record keeping protects both baker and customer, providing evidence of honest dealing and fair practice. The sweet pastries complete their brief rising period and await their turn in the oven's diminishing heat. These delicate items will bake quickly in the moderate temperature that follows bread baking, their high fat content promoting rapid browning while their smaller size ensures thorough cooking in shorter time. Edmund arranges them on wooden boards, spacing carefully to prevent sticking as they expand during baking. Outside, the market preparations intensify. Farmers arrive with cartloads of produce, root vegetables stored through the winter, early spring greens, dairy products from village herds. Craftsmen display their wares: pottery, wooden implements, leather goods, woolen cloth. The bakehouse will soon become part of this commercial ecosystem, its products competing for customers' limited coins. The second batch of bread approaches completion. its aroma indicating proper development of crust and crumb. Edmund checks their progress through the small observation port, noting the golden brown colour that indicates readiness. Soon these loaves will join their predecessors on the cooling racks, adding to the day's inventory of fresh bread available for sale. You learn to recognise the subtle differences between batches, how variations in ingredients, timing, or oven temperature create breads with distinct characteristics. Some customers develop preferences for bread from specific batches, returning repeatedly for loaves with particular textures or flavours. A master baker learns to satisfy these individual preferences while maintaining overall consistency. The filled pastries receive their final preparation before baking. A light brushing of beaten egg to promote browning, small decorative cuts to prevent bursting, careful arrangement on boards dusted with flour to prevent sticking. Each piece represents significant value: the cost of enriching ingredients, the time required for careful shaping, the skill needed to execute properly. Edmund explains the social significance of these luxury items in medieval village life. Sweet pastries appear at celebrations, religious festivals, and important family occasions. They mark moments of prosperity and joy, providing special treats that elevate ordinary meals into memorable experiences. The baker who can produce such items consistently enjoys elevated status within the community. As the morning advances toward midday, the bakehouse rhythm shifts from preparation to production and sales. The first customers begin arriving: servants from wealthy households collecting pre-ordered items, early market goers seeking fresh bread for their families, travelling merchants wanting provisions for continued journeys. Edmund greets each customer personally, maintaining the relationships that sustain the business. You observe these interactions carefully, learning the social skills that complement technical baking knowledge. Edmund remembers each customer's preferences, inquires about family members, offers advice about bread storage and preparation. These conversations build the trust and loyalty that protect the bakehouse during difficult times and ensure steady business throughout the year. The second batch of bread emerges from the oven with satisfying success, the loaves displaying the golden colour and hollow sound that indicate perfect completion. Their crusts crackle gently as they cool, releasing final wisps of steam and filling the air with the rich aroma that draws customers like a beacon. Each loaf represents another small victory in the daily challenge of feeding the community. Now comes the time for the sweet pastries to undergo their own transformation in the oven's moderate heat. Edmund loads them carefully onto his peel, their delicate structures requiring gentler handling than sturdy bread loaves. The filled crescents must be positioned to prevent filling from leaking, the braided pieces arranged to ensure even browning of their complex surfaces. Market day customers begin arriving in earnest now, their voices adding to the general bustle of commercial activity. Some seek specific items ordered in advance, others browse the day's selection looking for something special to grace their tables. The bakehouse becomes a social gathering point where neighbours exchange news, discuss local events, and maintain the community connections that bind village life together. But as you help Edmund serve the growing crowd of customers, you notice something troubling about the morning's production. Despite following all the proper procedures, despite Edmund's careful guidance and your growing skills, one batch of the specialty pastries seems to have developed an unusual appearance during baking. A subtle difference that might indicate a problem with technique or ingredients that could affect the bakehouse's carefully maintained reputation. You approach Edmund quietly, your voice barely above a whisper as customers continue browsing the morning selection. Master, the honey pastries. Something about their colour seems different, darker on one side than the others. Your eyes dart toward the batch in question, hoping no customers have noticed the subtle irregularity that troubles you. Edmund follows your gaze with the practiced discretion of a baker who has learned to assess problems without alarming customers. His experienced eyes examine the pastries carefully, noting the uneven browning that suggests one side of the oven was running hotter than expected during their brief baking time. He nods almost imperceptibly, acknowledging both the problem and your growing ability to spot such issues before they become public embarrassments. "Well observed," he murmurs, moving to position himself between the questionable pastries and the browsing customers. The oven stones on the left side are holding heat differently today. Perhaps a crack has developed, or ash has accumulated in an unexpected place. we'll need to investigate after the morning rush. This small crisis illustrates one of the fundamental challenges facing every guild baker: the constant pressure to maintain perfect standards while working with equipment and ingredients that vary from day to day. The guild's reputation depends on consistent quality, and any baker who regularly produces inferior goods risks losing both customers and guild membership. Edmund's quick thinking in concealing the flawed pastries demonstrates the judgment that separates master bakers from mere apprentices. The morning's customer flow increases as market day activity reaches its peak. Women arrive seeking fresh bread for their families, their practiced eyes examining each loaf for the signs of quality they've learned to recognise. Some prefer bread with darker crusts, believing it indicates better flavour and keeping qualities. Others choose lighter loaves, trusting that gentler baking produces more tender textures suitable for young children or elderly relatives. You watch Edmund interact with each customer, remembering their individual preferences and family circumstances. Widow Margaret always chooses the smallest loaves, her limited income requiring careful stretching of every penny. Young Mother Alice needs bread that will keep well for several days, feeding her husband and 4 growing children. Merchant William seeks impressive loaves that will reflect his prosperity when served to business associates and potential customers. These personal relationships represent the true foundation of the bakehouse's success. Guild regulations provide the framework for fair dealing, but individual trust and satisfaction determine whether customers return day after day, year after year. Edmund has spent decades building these connections, earning the confidence that allows families to depend on him for their daily sustenance. The guild system itself emerged from centuries of trial and error, developing rules and customs that protect both bakers and communities. Master bakers like Edmund serve not just as producers of bread, but as guardians of ancient knowledge and techniques passed down through generations of craftsmen. The 7-year apprenticeship system ensures that this wisdom transfers completely from teacher to student, preserving skills that took centuries to develop and refine. You help Edmund serve customers while continuing to learn the social aspects of the baker's craft. Each transaction involves more than simple exchange of bread for coins. Customers share news of family events, discuss local politics, seek advice about bread storage and preparation. The bakehouse serves as an informal community centre where information flows as freely as the aroma of fresh bread. Guild membership brings both privileges and responsibilities that shape every aspect of daily work. Members enjoy protection from unfair competition and access to exclusive markets, but must also maintain standards that reflect well on the entire organisation. Regular inspections ensure compliance with weight regulations, quality standards, and pricing agreements that keep the system functioning fairly for all participants. Edmund explains the complex hierarchy within the guild structure. Apprentices like yourself learning the basic skills, journeymen who have completed training but not yet established independent businesses, and master bakers who own their own bakeries and train the next generation. Advancement through these levels requires not just technical skill, but demonstration of character, business knowledge, and commitment to guild principles. The economic aspects of bread making prove more complex than you initially understood. Flour prices fluctuate with harvest quality and transportation costs. Wood for fuel must be purchased from authorised dealers who guarantee proper drying and storage. Equipment requires regular maintenance and occasional replacement, representing significant capital investments that must be recovered through careful pricing and efficient operation. Guild regulations establish minimum wages for apprentices and journeymen, ensuring that skilled workers receive fair compensation while preventing unfair competition based on exploitation of labour. These rules created the stable working conditions that allow the craft to flourish, attracting capable young people who might otherwise choose occupations offering better immediate rewards but less long-term security. The morning's bread sales proceed smoothly despite the concern about the flawed pastries. Edmund quietly removes the affected items from display, setting them aside for later evaluation. Regular customers trust his judgment completely, accepting his recommendations without question. This trust represents years of consistent quality and honest dealing, building the reputation that sustains the business through both prosperous and difficult times. You observe how Edmund handles various customer personalities, the demanding merchant who examines every loaf for imaginary flaws, the elderly woman who needs gentle assistance choosing appropriate bread for her diminished appetite, the young mother juggling coins and children while trying to make her selections. Each requires different approaches, but all receive the same courteous treatment and quality products. The specialty items for the manor house await collection by the head cook's assistant, who arrives promptly at the appointed time. These enriched rolls and decorated pastries represent the bakehouse's finest work, destined for tables where presentation matters as much as flavour. Edmund inspects each piece personally before allowing it to leave the bakehouse, ensuring that nothing substandard bears his reputation to such influential customers. Guild standards extend beyond simple product quality to encompass business practices, customer relations, and community involvement. Members must participate in religious observances, contribute to charitable activities, and support fellow bakers during times of hardship. These obligations create networks of mutual assistance that strengthen both individual businesses and the guild as a whole. The technical knowledge required for guild membership encompasses far more than basic bread making. Master bakers must understand grain varieties and their characteristics, yeast cultivation and management, oven construction and maintenance, fuel selection and usage, weather's effects on fermentation, seasonal adjustments to recipes and techniques. This expertise develops slowly through years of daily practice under experienced guidance. Edmund shares stories of his own apprenticeship under Master William, whose bakehouse occupied the same location 40 years ago. The techniques you're learning today were taught to Edmund in identical fashion, creating an unbroken chain of knowledge stretching back through generations. Some methods have evolved slightly, but the fundamental principles remain unchanged. Patience, attention to detail, and respect for the ancient craft of bread making. The Guild's quality control system operates through regular inspections by appointed officials who examine products, review records, and observe working conditions. These inspections serve multiple purposes: ensuring customer protection, maintaining standards that reflect well on all members, and identifying problems before they damage individual or collective reputations. The system works because guild members recognise their mutual dependence on maintaining high standards. You help Edmund prepare the next batch of dough, this one destined for afternoon baking when the oven's heat diminishes to levels suitable for different types of bread. This batch will produce the dense, dark loaves preferred by labourers and farmers, made with coarser flour and baked longer for extended keeping qualities. Each type of bread requires slightly different techniques and timing, demonstrating the breadth of knowledge master bakers must possess. The social stratification of medieval society reveals itself clearly through bread preferences and purchasing patterns. Wealthy families buy fine white bread made from carefully sifted flour, while poorer customers choose dark bread made from coarser grain that costs less but provides equal nourishment. The guild system ensures that all social levels receive honest products at fair prices, preventing exploitation while allowing bakers to earn reasonable profits. Customer education forms an important part of the baker's responsibility to the community. Edmund regularly advises customers about proper bread storage, explaining how to maintain freshness and prevent waste. He recommends specific types of bread for different uses: dense loaves for long journeys, tender bread for invalids, enriched products for special occasions. This guidance builds customer loyalty while reducing complaints about products used inappropriately. The morning's market activity reaches its peak as residents complete their weekly shopping. The bakehouse experiences its busiest period, with customers arriving in steady streams to select from the day's production. Edmund and you work together to maintain orderly service while ensuring each person receives individual attention and quality products. The rhythm becomes almost musical. Greeting, selecting, wrapping, collecting payment, thanking, moving to the next customer. Guild membership provides access to trade secrets and specialised knowledge that non-members cannot obtain legally. Certain techniques for improving bread texture, methods for extending keeping qualities, recipes for luxury items. These represent proprietary information protected by guild rules and oaths. Sharing such knowledge with unauthorised persons risks expulsion and loss of livelihood, creating strong incentives for maintaining the system's integrity. The flawed pastries continue to concern you as the morning progresses. Such problems, if they occurred regularly, could damage the bakehouse's reputation and affect Edmund's standing within the guild. Master bakers face constant pressure to maintain standards that justify their privileged position within the community. Any significant failure reflects not just on the individual, but on the entire system of training and quality control. Edmund explains how guild members support each other during difficulties, sharing ingredients during shortages, providing temporary assistance when illness or accident disrupts normal operations, offering technical advice when problems arise. This mutual aid system recognises that individual success depends on collective reputation, creating incentives for cooperation rather than destructive competition. The afternoon's baking schedule requires careful planning to use the oven's diminishing heat efficiently. Different products require different temperatures, creating opportunities for bakers skilled enough to sequence their work properly. The dense dark bread needs moderate sustained heat, while delicate pastries and specialty items require gentler conditions. Planning this sequence demonstrates the depth of knowledge that separates competent bakers from truly skilled masters. You help Edmund clean and organise the workspace between customer rushes, maintaining the orderly conditions essential for consistent quality. Every surface must be kept free of old dough or flour that could contaminate fresh batches. Tools require regular cleaning and proper storage to prevent rust or damage. These mundane tasks contribute as much to final quality as the more dramatic moments of mixing and baking. The Guild's training system ensures that knowledge transfers completely from master to apprentice, through daily observation and practice rather than formal instruction. You learn by watching Edmund's movements, copying his techniques, gradually absorbing the subtle judgments that guide his decisions. This apprenticeship model has preserved baking knowledge for centuries, creating the continuity that maintains quality standards across generations. Market Day brings opportunities to observe other guild members' work as customers compare products from different bakeries. Edmund's bread consistently commands premium prices because regular customers recognise its superior quality and dependability. This reputation took decades to build, but could be damaged quickly by careless work or inferior ingredients. The constant pressure to maintain excellence drives the attention to detail that characterises all successful guild operations. The morning's customer flow begins to diminish as market day shoppers complete their purchases and return home to prepare midday meals. The bakehouse enters a quieter period that allows for evaluation of the day's successes and problems. Edmund examines the flawed pastries more carefully, determining whether the issue stems from oven problems, ingredient variations, or technique failures that require attention. Customer feedback provides valuable information about product quality and market preferences. Edmund listens carefully to comments and complaints, using this input to refine his techniques and adjust his offerings to better serve community needs. The most successful bakers maintain close connections with their customers, treating them as partners in the ongoing effort to provide excellent bread at fair prices. The guild system's strength lies in its combination of technical training, quality control, mutual support, and community service. Members understand that their individual success depends on collective reputation, creating powerful incentives for maintaining high standards and supporting fellow bakers. This system has sustained bread-making communities for centuries, adapting to changing conditions while preserving essential knowledge and values. As the morning's activities wind down and you help Edmund prepare for the afternoon's baking, you reflect on the complexity of what initially seemed like simple work. Bread making involves not just technical skills, but business knowledge, customer relations, community involvement, and adherence to standards that protect both individual bakers and the guild system itself. The 7-year apprenticeship begins to seem barely adequate for absorbing such comprehensive requirements. But as you and Edmund work together to address the oven problem that caused the morning's pastry difficulties, investigating the stone surfaces and adjusting the airflow patterns that control heat distribution, you realise that some issues require not just individual skill, but the collective wisdom of the entire guild community. The question now becomes whether Edmund's reputation within the guild is strong enough to request the specialised assistance that might be needed to solve this technical problem permanently. Edmund's reputation within the guild proves more solid than you initially feared. By midday, Master Robert arrives from his bakehouse 2 villages over, his weathered face showing the same lines of concentration that mark all experienced bakers. He examines the problematic oven stones with practiced eyes, running his fingers along surfaces invisible to your inexperienced gaze, tapping gently with a small hammer to detect changes in sound that indicate structural problems. "Here," he says finally, pointing to an almost invisible crack running through one of the larger stones near the oven's left wall. The stone has split from repeated heating and cooling. It's creating an air channel that disrupts the heat flow, making that side run hotter while drawing heat away from the centre. His diagnosis brings relief. This represents a maintenance issue rather than a fundamental problem with Edmund's techniques or your developing skills. The repair requires specialised knowledge and tools not available in every bakehouse. Master Robert explains the process of removing the cracked stone without damaging its neighbours, finding a replacement of exactly the right size and thermal properties, and installing it properly to restore the oven's balanced heat distribution. Such work cannot be rushed. Attempting repairs during active baking periods could ruin entire batches of bread and waste precious ingredients. Edmund and Master Robert plan the repair for the following week, when the autumn harvest rush subsides slightly, and the bakehouse can afford a day without full production. This timing illustrates another aspect of the guild system's mutual support. Masters coordinate their assistance to minimise disruption to community bread supplies. When one bakehouse reduces operation for maintenance, neighbours temporarily increase production to ensure no family goes without daily bread. The seasonal nature of bread making becomes more apparent as autumn advances toward winter. The wheat harvested in late summer must be processed, stored, and managed to last through the cold months when no fresh grain arrives. Flour quality changes subtly as grain ages, requiring adjustments to water amounts, fermentation timing, and baking techniques. Edmund teaches you to recognise these variations and adapt your methods accordingly. Winter wheat, planted in autumn and harvested the following summer, produces flour with different characteristics than spring wheat, planted and harvested within the same year. The longer growing season develops stronger gluten structures that create bread with better texture and keeping qualities, but also require more aggressive kneading to develop properly. Understanding these differences and adjusting techniques accordingly separates competent bakers from truly skilled masters. Storage of flour through winter months presents its own challenges. The grain must be kept dry to prevent mould and spoilage, but not so dry that it becomes brittle and produces dusty flour that creates inferior bread. Temperature control requires constant attention. Too warm and insects multiply rapidly. Too cool and the flour loses its binding properties. Edmund shows you how to monitor storage conditions and make adjustments that preserve quality throughout the cold season. The village's rhythm changes as autumn progresses, affecting the bakehouse's daily operations in subtle but important ways. Harvest workers require dense, nutritious bread that will sustain heavy labour through long days in the fields. Families begin preserving foods for winter, creating demand for specific types of bread that complement salted meats and stored vegetables. The bakehouse must adapt its production to serve these seasonal needs while maintaining regular customers' expectations. Fuel management becomes critical as cold weather approaches. Wood must be cut, seasoned, and stored in quantities sufficient for winter's increased heating demands. The bakehouse consumes enormous amounts of fuel, not just for baking, but for maintaining the warm, dry conditions necessary for proper dough fermentation when outdoor temperatures drop below freezing. Edmund calculates fuel needs months in advance, contracting with woodcutters and arranging storage space for the winter's supply. The Guild's seasonal meetings address these common challenges facing all members as weather conditions change. Masters share information about grain quality variations, successful storage techniques, fuel suppliers offering competitive prices, and adjustments to recipes that accommodate winter conditions. These gatherings strengthen the professional relationships that support individual bakers while advancing the collective knowledge that improves everyone's work. You help Edmund prepare the bakehouse for winter operations, learning tasks that seemed unnecessary during the warmer months. Windows must be sealed against drafts that could affect dough rising temperatures. Additional insulation around rising baskets ensures consistent fermentation despite outdoor cold. The water supply requires protection against freezing, with backup sources identified in case the main well becomes unusable during severe weather. Customer patterns shift as the season progresses. Wealthy families increase their orders for enriched breads and pastries as the holiday season approaches, creating opportunities for premium sales that help offset winter's higher operating costs. Working families seek bread with longer keeping qualities, reducing their shopping frequency to conserve both time and money during the harsh months ahead. The social aspects of bread making change with the seasons as well. Summer's outdoor markets give way to indoor gatherings where neighbours share warmth while conducting necessary business. The bakehouse becomes even more central to community life as one of the few consistently warm, welcoming spaces available to everyone regardless of social status. Edmund encourages these social functions, understanding that customer loyalty depends as much on comfort and friendship as on bread quality. Guild apprentices face particular challenges during their first winter, learning to adapt techniques developed during warmer months to conditions that affect every aspect of the baking process. Dough fermentation slows in cold weather, requiring adjustments to yeast quantities and rising times. Oven heating patterns change as outside temperatures drop, demanding modifications to fuel loading and air circulation management. You practice these seasonal adjustments under Edmund's careful guidance, making mistakes that teach lessons impossible to learn from verbal instruction alone. Bread that rises too slowly because you underestimated cold weather's effects. Loaves with poor texture because you fail to account for winter flour's different absorption characteristics. Ovens that heat unevenly because you didn't adjust fuel placement for changed air circulation patterns. Each error provides valuable learning experiences that build the intuitive knowledge master bakers rely upon. Edmund encourages these mistakes as necessary parts of your education, explaining that book learning cannot substitute for direct experience with seasonal variations. The 7-year apprenticeship exists partly to ensure that students experience multiple complete seasonal cycles, developing skills that work consistently regardless of weather conditions. The Guild's quality standards remain constant throughout the year, but the techniques required to meet those standards change significantly with the seasons. Summer's quick fermentation and rapid baking give way to winter's slower processes that require different timing and temperature management. Master bakers develop multiple sets of techniques for different conditions, switching seamlessly as weather patterns change. Edmund shares memories of particularly challenging winters when extreme cold tested every baker's skills and endurance. Ovens that wouldn't heat properly despite increased fuel consumption, flour that behaved unpredictably due to moisture problems in storage areas, customers who needed bread despite snow that blocked normal supply routes. These stories illustrate the resilience and adaptability that successful guild members must develop to serve their communities consistently. The economic pressures of winter affect every aspect of bakehouse operations. Fuel costs increase significantly as demand exceeds summer supply. Transportation difficulties raise flour prices and create delivery delays that require careful inventory management. Customer spending patterns change as families conserve resources for heating and other winter necessities, reducing demand for luxury items while maintaining steady need for basic bread. Guild membership provides crucial support during these challenging periods through cooperative purchasing arrangements that reduce individual costs and shared knowledge that helps members optimise their winter operations. The mutual aid system ensures that temporary difficulties don't force competent bakers out of business, preserving the skilled workforce that serves community needs throughout the year. You learn to read the subtle signs that indicate seasonal changes affecting bread-making conditions. The way flour feels different on humid days versus dry ones. How dough texture changes when atmospheric pressure drops before storms. The correlation between wind direction and oven heating efficiency. These observations seem minor individually, but collectively they represent the accumulated wisdom that enables consistent quality despite constantly changing conditions. The village's preparation for winter creates opportunities for specialised baking that supplements the bakehouse's regular income. Families commission large batches of travel bread for relatives journeying to other regions before roads become impassable. Merchants order preserved goods that combine bread with dried fruits and nuts, creating portable meals for extended business trips. Religious institutions request special items for autumn festivals and winter holy days. Edmund explains how successful bakers build their reputations through consistent performance during difficult periods when lesser craftsmen struggle to maintain standards. Customers remember who provided quality bread during the harshest winter storms, who maintained fair prices when grain shortages affected other bakeries, who stayed open when competitors closed due to fuel shortages or equipment failures. The Guild's training system ensures that these seasonal challenges become learning opportunities rather than insurmountable obstacles. Experienced masters share their knowledge freely with younger members, understanding that everyone benefits when the entire community maintains high standards. The apprenticeship system creates multiple opportunities to observe different approaches to seasonal problems, building comprehensive knowledge that serves bakers throughout their careers. As autumn progresses toward its peak, you notice how the changing light affects the bakehouse's daily rhythms. Earlier sunsets mean longer periods of working by firelight and oil lamps, requiring adjustments to tasks that depend on visual evaluation. The angle of sunlight through the small window changes, affecting the natural lighting that helps judge dough colour and texture during daylight hours. Customer preferences evolve with the season, as families adapt their eating patterns to available foods and changing nutritional needs. Dense, warming breads become more popular as outdoor temperatures drop. Enriched products that provide extra calories gain favour among workers facing physically demanding harvest tasks. The bakehouse must anticipate these shifts and adjust production accordingly, while maintaining the variety that serves different family needs and economic circumstances. The Guild's seasonal festivals provide opportunities for bakers to display their finest work while strengthening professional relationships and community connections. Harvest celebrations feature elaborate breads shaped into decorative forms representing abundance and prosperity. Religious observances require specialty items prepared according to ancient traditions that connect current practices with centuries of cultural continuity. You participate in preparations for the Autumn Guild feast, learning to create the ceremonial breads that mark important community occasions. These items demand skills beyond daily bread making, intricate shaping techniques, decorative glazing methods, timing coordination that ensures everything reaches peak quality simultaneously. The work challenges your developing abilities while providing exposure to the artistic aspects of the baker's craft. The feast itself reveals the guild system's social dimensions beyond its economic and technical functions. Members gather with their families to celebrate successful harvests and strengthen relationships that support the craft throughout the year. Apprentices meet peers from other bakeries, comparing experiences and building networks that will serve them throughout their careers. Master bakers share stories and knowledge while evaluating the progress of younger members. Winter's approach brings increased focus on maintenance tasks that prepare equipment and facilities for the demanding months ahead. Oven stones require careful inspection for cracks or wear that could affect performance during peak heating demands. Tools need repair or replacement before cold weather makes such work difficult. Storage areas must be weatherproof to protect valuable ingredients from moisture and temperature fluctuations. The Guild's collective purchasing agreements become more valuable as winter shortages drive up individual costs for fuel, ingredients, and supplies. Member bakeries coordinate their orders to achieve better prices while ensuring adequate supplies for community needs. This cooperation demonstrates how the Guild system creates benefits that extend beyond simple, professional training and quality control. You help Edmund inventory the bakehouse's winter supplies, learning to calculate needs months in advance, and identify potential shortages before they become critical. Flour requirements based on expected customer demand and seasonal variations in consumption patterns. Fuel needs accounting for both baking and facility heating throughout the cold season. Special ingredients for holiday baking that must be ordered early to ensure availability. The mathematical aspects of seasonal planning prove more complex than daily production calculations. Weather variations affect customer patterns unpredictably, requiring safety margins that balance preparedness against waste. Transportation difficulties create timing, uncertainties that demand flexible scheduling and backup suppliers. Economic pressures force careful balance between adequate supplies and excessive inventory costs. Edmund shares the responsibility for community bread supplies during winter emergencies when weather or other problems disrupt normal operations. Guild members coordinate their production to ensure continuous service even when individual bakeries face temporary difficulties. This mutual support system demonstrates how professional organisations can serve broader social needs while protecting individual business interests. The seasonal transition also brings changes in the types of problems you encounter during daily work. Cold weather affects yeast behaviour in ways that require constant adjustments to timing and quantities. Humidity variations change flour characteristics daily, demanding flexible approaches to mixing and kneading. Fuel burning patterns shift with outside temperatures, requiring modifications to oven management techniques developed during warmer months. These challenges test your developing skills while building the adaptability that characterises successful guild bakers. Each seasonal cycle adds layers of experience that deepen understanding and improve judgment. The knowledge accumulates gradually, creating the intuitive wisdom that enables master bakers to maintain consistent quality despite constantly changing conditions. But as winter's first serious cold snap approaches, and you help Edmund make final preparations for the challenging months ahead, you realise that seasonal changes bring more than technical adjustments to bread making. They also affect the very fabric of community life in ways that will test not just your baking skills, but your understanding of the baker's role in sustaining the social bonds that hold village society together during its most difficult period. The first harsh winds of winter arrive earlier than expected, rattling the bakehouse shutters and sending drafts through gaps that seemed insignificant during warmer months. You work alongside Edmund to seal these openings with strips of cloth and clay, learning that a baker's duties extend far beyond mixing dough and tending ovens. The bakehouse must become a sanctuary against winter's assault, maintaining the warm, stable conditions that allow bread making to continue when outdoor temperatures make other work impossible. Winter's arrival transforms the village in ways both visible and subtle. The market square, so bustling during autumn's harvest celebrations, now hosts only the most essential commerce. Farmers retreat to indoor tasks, repairing tools, mending harness, planning next year's crops. Craftsmen move their work closer to hearth fires, abandoning cold workshops for spaces that can be adequately heated. The bakehouse becomes even more central to community life, one of the few places where people can gather in genuine warmth while conducting necessary business. You observe how Edmund adapts his techniques to winter conditions with the unconscious skill of someone who has navigated dozens of such seasonal transitions. Water must be warmed more carefully to achieve proper temperatures for yeast activation. Dough requires longer rising times as cold air slows fermentation processes. The oven demands more fuel to reach baking temperatures, and its heat dissipates more quickly when loading and unloading bread. These adjustments become second nature through daily repetition, but they represent accumulated wisdom that took Edmund years to develop fully. Each winter brought new challenges and learning opportunities: unusually severe cold that tested fuel supplies, moisture problems that affected flour storage, equipment failures that required creative solutions. The knowledge gained from these experiences now guides his confident navigation of seasonal difficulties that might overwhelm less experienced bakers. Customer patterns shift dramatically as winter establishes its grip on the village. Families reduce their bakehouse visits to conserve both warmth and money, purchasing larger quantities less frequently, rather than daily shopping that characterise summer months. This change requires adjustments to production schedules and inventory management, ensuring adequate supplies for irregular but substantial demand patterns. The Guild's mutual support system proves especially valuable during winter's early weeks, when all bakers face similar challenges simultaneously. Master Robert returns to help complete the oven repairs, before truly severe weather makes such work impossible. Other Guild members share information about fuel suppliers, grain storage techniques, and customer strategies that help everyone optimize their winter operations. You participate in these collaborative efforts, beginning to understand how individual success depends on collective knowledge and cooperation. The Guild system functions as more than professional training. It creates networks of mutual aid that strengthen the entire craft, while serving community needs more effectively than isolated individual efforts could achieve. The repair of the cracked oven stone becomes an education in itself, revealing construction techniques and thermal principles that escaped your notice during months of daily use. Master Robert explains how the original builders selected stones for their heat retention properties, how they calculated spacing for optimal air circulation, how they designed the chamber's proportions to create even temperature distribution. This knowledge represents generations of experimentation and refinement, encoded in the physical structure that enables daily bread production. Working alongside two master bakers provides insights into the subtle differences that distinguish truly skilled practitioners from merely competent ones. Edmund's movements show the efficiency that comes from decades of practice, while Master Robert's approach reveals alternative techniques that achieve similar results through different methods. These variations demonstrate how guild training creates consistent quality, while allowing individual expression within established parameters. The winter's first major snowfall tests everyone's preparation and adaptability. Deep drifts block normal supply routes, forcing creative solutions for obtaining necessary materials. Customers brave harsh conditions to reach the bakehouse, demonstrating bread's essential role in daily survival. The warm, flour-scented interior provides refuge from winter's assault, while maintaining the production that sustains community life. You learn to read winter weather signs that affect baking conditions, how atmospheric pressure changes influence yeast behaviour, how humidity variations alter flour characteristics, how wind patterns affect oven heating efficiency. These observations seem minor individually, but collectively they represent the environmental awareness that enables consistent quality despite constantly changing conditions. The Guild's winter traditions strengthen professional relationships while preserving cultural knowledge that might otherwise disappear. Evening gatherings feature stories of legendary bakers whose skills became village folklore, techniques passed down through generations of master-apprentice relationships, innovations that solved persistent problems and became standard practice throughout the region. Edmund shares memories of his own master, whose bakehouse occupied this same location decades ago. The techniques you're learning today were taught to Edmund in identical fashion, creating unbroken chains of knowledge that stretch back through centuries. Some methods have evolved slightly, but fundamental principles remain unchanged. Patience, attention to detail, and respect for the ancient craft that transformed simple ingredients into sustenance. These stories reveal how individual bakers become links in larger historical chains, each generation preserving and refining knowledge while adapting to contemporary conditions. Your own apprenticeship represents continuation of traditions that predate written records, connecting current practice with humanity's earliest efforts to create reliable food supplies through skilled craftsmanship. Winter's deepest cold brings challenges that test every aspect of guild training. Extreme temperatures affect everything from yeast cultivation to oven heating, requiring constant adjustments and careful attention to details that summer's forgiving conditions might mask. You make mistakes that would have been minor during warmer months, but become significant problems when conditions allow no margin for error. Each failure provides valuable learning opportunities that build the resilience and adaptability master bakers must possess. Edmund guides these experiences with patient instruction and philosophical perspective, explaining that winter's difficulties serve essential educational purposes that cannot be replicated during easier seasons. The harsh conditions that make work more difficult also make success more meaningful and memorable. The community's dependence on daily bread becomes most apparent during winter's worst weather, when other food sources dwindle and preservation stores require supplementation with fresh products. Families arrive at the bakehouse despite dangerous conditions, demonstrating trust in the baker's commitment to maintain service regardless of personal hardship or inconvenience. This responsibility shapes the character of guild bakers in ways that extend beyond technical skill development. The knowledge that entire families depend on your daily work creates pressure that demands not just competence, but consistency and reliability that persists through all conditions. The guild system exists partly to ensure that such critical community functions continue despite individual difficulties or limitations. As winter progresses toward its midpoint, you realize how profoundly the seasonal cycle affects not just baking techniques, but personal growth and community relationships. The challenges of maintaining quality during difficult conditions build confidence and problem-solving abilities that transfer to all aspects of life. The responsibility for community welfare develops character traits that mark mature craftsmen and reliable community members. Guild membership provides identity and purpose that extend beyond simple employment or economic activity. The shared knowledge, mutual obligations, and collective reputation create bonds that sustain members through personal difficulties while maintaining standards that serve broader social needs. This system has preserved essential skills and cultural knowledge through centuries of political and economic change. The winter solstice brings guild celebrations that mark the year's turning point, while strengthening professional relationships and community connections. Special breads commemorate the season's significance, requiring techniques that challenge developing skills while connecting current practice with ancient traditions. These observances demonstrate how craft knowledge intertwines with cultural identity and spiritual meaning. You participate in preparing these ceremonial items, learning that master bakers serve roles beyond simple food production. They act as custodians of cultural traditions, creators of items that mark important life events, and maintainers of social customs that bind communities together through shared experiences and collective memory. The slow return of longer daylight hours brings subtle but significant changes to bakehouse rhythms and community life. Customers venture out more readily, increasing social interactions that have been limited by winter's harshness. The promise of spring influences both individual mood and collective optimism, affecting everything from customer spending patterns to planning for next year's activities. Edmund begins sharing more advanced techniques as your skills develop, and the apprenticeship progresses toward its eventual completion. These lessons go beyond basic bread making to encompass business management, customer relations, guild politics, and the broader responsibilities of master bakers within their communities. The knowledge represents not just professional training, but preparation for adult roles that extend throughout society. The guild system's educational value becomes clear as you observe how apprenticeship develops not just technical skills, but character traits essential for community leadership. The patience required for proper fermentation teaches persistence in all endeavours. The attention to detail needed for consistent quality develops habits that serve well in any profession. The responsibility for community welfare builds awareness of mutual dependence and collective obligation. Winter's end approaches gradually, marked by subtle signs that experienced eyes learn to recognise. The quality of light changes as days lengthen perceptibly. Snow begins melting during midday hours even when temperatures remain below freezing. Birds alter their behaviour in ways that suggest seasonal awareness beyond human observation. These changes affect bread-making conditions and customer patterns in ways that require constant adaptation and attention. The approaching spring brings anticipation of renewed activity and opportunity, but also awareness that seasonal cycles will repeat endlessly throughout your career. Each winter will bring similar challenges requiring similar adaptations, but also new variations that demand continued learning and growth. The guild system provides stability and support for navigating these cycles while maintaining the standards that serve community needs consistently. As you help Edmund prepare for spring's eventual arrival, planning equipment maintenance, calculating ingredient needs, considering production changes that reflect seasonal preferences, you realise how completely the baker's craft has shaped your understanding of time, community, and personal responsibility. The daily rhythm of bread making has become internal, structuring thoughts and priorities around cycles of preparation, creation, and service that extend far beyond the bakehouse walls. The 7-year apprenticeship that once seemed impossibly long now appears barely adequate for absorbing the comprehensive knowledge that master bakers must possess. Technical skills represent only the foundation for understanding that encompasses weather patterns, grain varieties, fuel management, customer psychology, business mathematics, guild politics, and community dynamics that affect every aspect of professional success. Edmund's influence extends far beyond the bread he baked and the apprentice he trained. Throughout his 40 years as master baker, he shaped the eating habits and daily rhythms of 3 generations of village families. Children who grew up eating his bread carried memories of its particular taste and texture to distant places, spreading appreciation for the craft standards he maintained. His innovations in winter baking techniques were adopted by other guild members, becoming standard practices that improved bread quality throughout the region. The apprentices Edmund trained carried his methods to their own bakeries, establishing a network of bakers whose techniques bore the subtle signature of his teaching. These 2nd and 3rd generation influences created a legacy that shaped bread-making practices across multiple communities, preserving not just technical knowledge, but philosophical approaches to craft and service that defined the very meaning of master craftsmanship. The guild system that Edmund represented and helped maintain provided the foundation for economic stability and social order in medieval communities throughout Europe. By preserving essential skills through systematic training, regulating quality to protect consumers, and creating mutual support networks among craftsmen, the guilds enabled the specialisation that allowed society to develop beyond subsistence-level survival. The baker's craft exemplified how skilled trades created the surplus production and reliable services necessary for complex civilization. Edmund's daily work contributed to broader cultural patterns that defined medieval life. The central role of bread in religious symbolism, the social significance of shared meals, the economic relationships between rural grain producers and urban consumers. His bakehouse served as a community gathering place where information flowed, relationships formed, and social bonds strengthened through shared reliance on essential services. This social function of craft workshops helped create the dense networks of mutual obligation and support that characterized medieval community life. The guild training system that shaped Edmund's career became the model for education and professional development throughout medieval Europe, influencing everything from cathedral construction to manuscript illumination. The master-apprentice relationship created knowledge transfer mechanisms that preserved technical innovations, while encouraging gradual improvement and adaptation to changing conditions. Through decades of daily bread making, Edmund evolved from a young apprentice focused primarily on technical mastery into a community elder whose wisdom extended far beyond baking. The responsibility for feeding others shaped his character in ways that made him patient with human frailties, generous with knowledge, and deeply committed to maintaining standards that served collective rather than merely personal interests. His transformation exemplified how meaningful work that serves essential community needs develops character traits that benefit society as a whole. The knowledge Edmund preserved and transmitted continues today in artisanal bakeries worldwide, where bakers still read dough texture by touch, judge oven temperature by intuition, and time fermentation by sensory cues rather than mechanical measurement. Modern bread-making education still follows apprenticeship models that emphasize observation and practice over theoretical instruction, recognizing that some knowledge can only be transmitted through direct experience and personal guidance. The guild principles Edmund embodied — quality standards, mutual support, community service, and knowledge preservation — persist in modern professional organizations that regulate trades, maintain educational standards, and provide networks of assistance among practitioners. The social function of neighbourhood bakeries as community gathering places continues in areas where industrial production has not completely replaced local craftsmanship. Contemporary movements towards sustainable agriculture, local food systems, and artisanal production represent renewed appreciation for the values Edmund's career embodied: the connection between skilled work and community welfare, the importance of preserving traditional knowledge, and the satisfaction that comes from creating essential goods through personal mastery rather than industrial process. Like yeast that lives on invisibly in countless loaves, Edmund's gentle wisdom continues rising through the generations of bakers whose hands learned patience from his teaching, transforming simple grain into the daily miracle that nourishes both body and community spirit, one careful loaf at a time.